Yes, so welcome everyone. Just as a way of introduction, my name is Pramod Gosavi. Currently, I'm an investor at a firm called Blumberg Capital. So I spend a lot of time on AI, data, and cybersecurity. So I mostly look at cybersecurity from a data AI angle. Atul is a friend of mine. I met him a few years ago at an RSA, and the CISO who actually he introduced me saying that this guy is the boss of everything AuthZ. Like that's how he made an introduction saying, we were just chatting about AuthZ and he said, you should meet Atul. And I met him a few times, a great thought leader in his own space. So we met during Identity Works a couple of weeks ago. We started chatting about agents and the identity problems in agents. And we just agreed saying, hey, let's just do a podcast. Maybe we'll just open it up to folks and have them ask questions. So here we are. Thanks a lot for attending. So I will have Atul introduce himself and we can get started. And feel free to enter questions in the group chat. And I don't think we need a whole hour, so we will have a lot of Q&A questions in the end.
Yeah, thanks Pramod for having me, and thanks everyone for spending your Friday morning or afternoon with us. Appreciate the generous words. It also puts a lot of responsibility on me to make sure that all your questions are addressed and that I can sufficiently provide you insights on this topic. Just by way of background, I'm currently the CTO of Signal, and we are a startup in the area of zero standing privilege or modern identity management. We have a slightly different approach to access management than what you might be used to, and we have successfully deployed at large enterprises in this space. And we have recently launched an MCP gateway, which kind of got some of this discussion going with Pramod. Before this, I used to work at Google, where I wrote a blog, which kind of grew into a standard that is now called CAPE. And the blog itself was titled CAPE. And then before that, I've been an entrepreneur. I have worked on the SAML specifications long, long ago, and now I'm working on CAPE and now AI. So how I like to say it is, in the first few years of my career, I spent my time opening doors, use single sign-on using SAML, and now I spend my time closing doors using CAPE. So that's just a way of putting it. All right, over to you, Pramod.
Yeah, so let's just start with. So everybody can see this, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It'll be good if you can go to slideshow mode, though. Yeah. Perfect.
Yeah. So we just want to set a stage here. So broadly, I see like three different implementation, and this is how the industry has progressed. So the first implementation is a Copilot, or like an enterprise search use case. So when LLMs came about in 2022, everybody rushed to build Copilots. So they were building this search tools on top of their docs and data, very low hanging fruit. You can have LLMs search for something, and that's a very quick and easy use case to get into for most enterprises, and everybody's doing this. So, and as years has progressed, this has become a feature, and I think it's a good feature, and every AI platform should have this search feature on top of the existing data, because it's a much easier and better way to do search right now with LLMs. So the second dominant thing that came out of this is like, hey, instead of doing search, can I have agent actually do something more meaty, right? So agents came in, and so think of agents as, it's a software program that, so for me, the definition of agent is like the software program has to have an LLM inside it. So if it doesn't have an LLM, it's not an AI agent. So think of a software program with an agent, and then it talks to data through other app or through your own database, right? So Uber use case is, you have an RevOps or an AIS. Yeah.
Join the meeting.
AISDR use cases where you have put together this whole pipeline of pulling data from Salesforce, pulling data from HubSpot, sending emails to the prospects, right? So this is a very simple agentic use case. And at every point, the agent has access to data and it's making autonomous decisions on its own to pull the right data and get the function done. And then recently this year, MCP has been a rage. So this has been seen as a new, some people call as like a API plus plus, some people call as a USB layer, some people call it an HTTP layer. So where it came about is like you have a front end and you ask questions in natural language to a back end. And then this MCP combination of a client and a server translates the natural language queries into APIs, or it can actually have a direct access to data, and it gets it done. So you don't have to worry about what's on the other end. You just ask questions and you just do whatever you want on the other side, right? So we're going to use this framework to have the conversation today.
Yeah, I think if I can clarify, like I think you're right in characterizing, the current state as sort of MCP being kind of a de facto standard like USB or HTTP. It's not quite there yet. It shows a lot of promise, but it is definitely a big development, because even though it's not actually developed in an open standards kind of way, it is a de facto standard proposed by Anthropic and which has been adopted by OpenAI and Google. So the biggest platform players right now do support MCP, and which is why it is now a significant moment for the industry.
Yep. Yeah. So let us get back to identity, right? So traditionally identity was always human led, right? So human had to access your application. Initially, everybody was on a Microsoft ecosystem, Active Directory, and your IT team gave you access, right? So now let's just talk about how agents are different than humans. And I'm talking about agents here. It encompasses all of the three use cases. So agent could be a search agent, it could be a generic agent, or agent also could be MCP. So agents are always helpful if they are autonomous. Autonomous in this case is they're just taking decisions on their own based on the functionality, right? So they're not waiting for a human to tell them what to do. So that's very different than humans. So humans will just act on something, while autonomous agents can, they have a full leeway to do whatever they can. So here I am just showing the difference between like humans versus agents, right? So autonomous agents, they operate independently. They make real-time decisions. So let's just say somebody put a new lead into Salesforce, and immediately, like real time, like half an hour, you need to contact that prospect to get the funnel started, right? So it's like a real-time decision. It also acts on behalf of others, right? So if you're a salesperson, you don't have to do anything. You put a prospect in and the whole funnel starts, right? It's also like scalable to thousands of instances. Like say you come from a conference, you have like 200, 300 leads, and it just fires up a lot of these agents to get your funnel started, right? So just to recap, the agents, they act on behalf of humans. So it's not humans actually using agents. So to me, I think if you're using AI to work, that's not agents. Like agents are something that are autonomous and they're acting on behalf of you. They're also very short-lived, so they will just come up like a agent that looks at Salesforce. It barely requires like a few seconds to pull what it needs, and then it will spin it down. And the last one is very, very important is, so previously you had only two ecosystems. Like one is, I would say, as an on-prem ecosystem, which is heavily like Microsoft dependent. And then there was some Oracle, SAP, and IBM, like those legacy systems. And then you had SaaS, right? So Okta came about when SaaS started. So to me, those are the two very distinct ecosystems. But agents, they have to traverse across different systems, API, SaaS application, on-prem, and also more importantly, apps actually. So this is something that you don't see identity right now is how to traverse just between the apps, like going between email and calendar, Salesforce versus HubSpot. So we'll talk in the next few slides on that.
Yeah.
Atul,
If I can add to that, it's a great background. I mean, one thing that I've sort of felt has empowered agents is the development of step-by-step reasoning in LLMs, right? Before you didn't quite have that, and therefore you couldn't break down a task into subtasks that could be could be spun out to different agents or different servers. But now that you have that, I think that is enabling this autonomous workflows a lot more than we could in the past. So that I think why the agentic AI now becomes really important for the future.
Yep. Yeah, so let's just talk about legacy IAM. So as I was mentioning, like the legacy IAM was long-lived accounts, right? On the Active Directory, I don't even know if they would actually ever kick you out, but on the SaaS side, they give you these tokens that last for a specific amount of time. And the provisioning is always manual, like somebody has to give you a sign-on or a single sign-on where you get it. And then the world is still like passwords or MFA to get in, to get access. It goes a little bit further into role-based access grants. Like depending on an admin or a user or a super user, you'll get access to some functionality of the function or not, right? So net, the access controls are very, very static. You're just given something, assigned a deployment. And for a long time, actually, the ITDR we'll talk about ITDR later on, which is, what happens during runtime. Like say I log into a system, initially people think I am who I am, and then I start misusing the ecosystem, and nobody could really figure that out because guess what? Like the identity systems were not looking at it. Like everything has to go to SIM, and the SIM has to come back and say, hey, this guy is not whom he is. So it was not a runtime, and the identity guy said it's not my problem, and the SIM says it's an identity problem, and that's how you see most of the breaches start with identity. So OAuth is a leading format right now, and I'll have Atul talk about it. So that's the golden standard right now. Again, it assumes that you're going to log in, you're going to stay logged in. And another problem I think recently it was brought by some CISO is that it also let you orchestrate the ID across different SaaS apps on a blanket basis, and that creates a lot of supply chain and data issues if you use OAuth. Atul, you want to say anything about this?
Yeah, sure. And I'll also address the comment from Krishna. So yeah, I think you've laid out quite a few of the current sort of way things work. I agree that this has kind of worked for us in the user-based world, not the AI world. And it definitely is still a problem because the mere fact that most attacks leverage identities. The reason is because once you have compromised a user, now you get access to a lot of stuff, and that is because of the way we are doing access control today, which is kind of summarized in this slide a little bit, is not good enough because any user logging in has too much permissions, right? So just coming to ABAC, the comment from Krishna. So yes, attribute-based access control does give you more contextual access. It is definitely, a couple of issues with that. One is it leads to some kind of a maintenance burden because now you have to code what these attributes mean in a variety of applications. And so if your policy is changed, now you're going to have to go and change all that code, right? And then the other thing is sort of the reliance on these attributes being true, kind of either you're pulling them from a database. Now you have to worry at the time of decision whether that database is actually up or not, or that system that you're relying on for attributes is up or not. So a few issues there, but yeah, definitely gives you more context than RBAC. Pramod?
Yeah. So let's just sum up with some of the issues. So let us start with consent, right? So this talks about the first layer right now with agencies, like how do you actually delegate consent? Like how do I tell my this AI SDR is like, hey, just act on my behalf? Do I just give them a blanket permission, or do I stop this system? And how do I stop this system on a daily basis? And if I stop this system, is that really helpful, or should I just give them blanket permission, right? So that's starting with the consent initially. The second one is interoperability, and this is a huge problem, and that has been a issue with Microsoft and Okta and Oracle and others. Is they don't want to work with, they just want you to use their own authentication. They don't want to use third party, and the power of the agent is really to traverse across different services, right? So how can we make sure like the authentication actually and authorization works across every single tool that you want to touch? The third one is trust, right? So previously, humans can be trusted, right? So there's a rogue employee and a good employee. So a good employee goes to Salesforce and does what's supposed to do. A rogue employee will do, insider will do, right? But can you say the same thing about an agent where, I mean, the agents won't be rogue, but what if they get prompt injected, they get hacked, right? So then if you give them blanket permission, they can just, do whatever they want. But you, like most humans, like most employees are not supposed to do that, right? So there was this layer of trust with the existing identity that doesn't exist. Like we cannot just give away the keys to the house to an agent. The third one is intent, right? So intent is like is what are the rights, what are the authorization for this agent? Like for example, if it touches Salesforce, I just want it to go and get like a simple small piece of information from Salesforce, like an email address or notes, but I don't want it to touch anything else, right? And this could be issues with like compliance and privacy, but more importantly, like security. So you don't want the agents to have like a blanket control. So that's where the intent comes in, is like, hey, I know what you should do, and I just want to limit your rights to that. So that brings me up into the RBAC and zero trust issues. Um, so maybe I will just have Atul talk about it because he does a much better job talking about it than me.
Sure, yeah. And before we get into the details, right? So some high-level comments, right? So I think I heard Gartner's, I think one of the Gartner analysts, Dennis Shue, who basically said that there are two types of risks from AI, right? There are existing risks that are amplified by AI, and there are completely new risks that come with AI, right? And many of these relate to identity, but some don't, right? So, for example, if you think about prompt injection, it's a new risk that we didn't have before, right? But if you think about just the ability to, like, what is captured here in the intent world, right? If you if you see a human with good judgment will know what to use, what data to use, and what not to use. Doesn't always happen, but at least there is some understanding of common sense that says, hey, I shouldn't be using this personal information in this response or whatever like that. But because an agent doesn't have that judgment, and I think there are some papers actually show how agents completely lack that kind of judgment, I think then you end up in this situation where if you have too much permissions, now you're exposing all this data to the agent, and now that data might end up where you really don't want it to, right? And so that's why the RBAC problem becomes very important, because a typical RBAC system, even if you have good controls over, access reviews, and you're trying to limit how much people can access, it is fundamentally a system that captures the permissions that you could require, right, as your job, right? So let's say you're a customer service agent, you don't know like which customer you'll want to access, right? So you typically would have the ability to access all customer data, right? And that's kind of the problem that comes with RBAC, is basically that you cannot have the context of what the user is actually doing at that point, to limit what you can access. The problem gets worse with AI because now the combination of lack of judgment and having too much access now becomes like really really problematic, right? And so yeah, and of course on the ITDR front, like we could base some user behavior kind of analysis, lateral movement and that kind of stuff, but it's much harder to do now with agents because their behavior is going to be much different. So yeah, I think this is a good time to like just have maybe the audience also raise their awareness of hey, this is an issue that I see. Like if anyone wants to contribute to this discussion, would love that those contributions. You can raise your hand and then we can unmute you for that. All right, we'll keep going. But if you do have anything, just please participate either through the chat or through by raising your hand. All right.
Yeah. So the last bullet on the observability and ITDR, right? I think this becomes even more important in the agentic world. It's like a trust plus verify, and you have to trust plus verify here. Otherwise, either of these agents are going to get rogue, and you'll never like figure that out, right? So the ITDR observability becomes a lot more important in the agentic world than in the human world.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay. So I think two people raised their hands.
Okay. I can't see it from here, so you can see it. So why don't you let them talk?
Sean. Yeah. Sean, I think you can unmute.
Yeah, Sean.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
I have a very interesting question. So based on your third diagram, when you have the beginning, the middle, and then using MCP servers as your interface to allow other agents to essentially talk to your backend tools or systems, Atul or anyone, do you see MCP clients as workload identities? And should they be categorized with their own identifier, with their own authorization, with their own access? Because if you're opening this up, MCP servers are the new APIs, correct? So the question I have now is, I know from Identiverse and from many blogs and articles that in identity, AI is not ready for our data in identity, and our data in identity is not really ready for AI. So how do you combat data swamp with speed and agility for the business to make IAM an enabler using AI when your data isn't ready? Well, there's like a lot of questions there, Atul, and I'm sorry, but like
No, sorry.
What are your thoughts
so
on
yeah,
it?
I can start with the first one, which is the agent identity. And I think you're right. I mean, we need to have a good handle. I think of the agent identity or the agent sort of workload identity, whatever you call it, um, as a problem that is similar to what people do with the Play Store or the App Store, that you need to have some way to control which agents can actually be used in your infrastructure, right? And I know Anthropic is working on an app store like that. So I think, yeah, that's something that you'll see coming from one of the major providers, right? The other problem, which I've not actually seen anywhere, mentioned anywhere, but I'm deeply concerned about it, is that you also need an LLM identity or attestation, right? Because these LLMs have invested a lot of money in making sure they're safe and they're resistant to prompt injection and all these things. If I bring my own LLM, like I'm using Mistral or Llama or some small language model, and I have access to all these MCP servers, now all that enterprise data is in the hands of an untrustworthy intelligence, right? Which I think becomes a really big problem. So I think we need a solution that can attest to the LLM, to the agent, and the user and the intent in order for us to be able to access, our enterprise data. So, right? So totally agree with that, Sean. And I think I kind of took it a step further. There's a second part of your question, which is our data is not ready for AI, right? I think there are two parts to it. One is sort of just the formatting and how do you actually talk AI, so to say, right? But there is the other problem of the accessibility. Like, should this user be accessing this data for the task that they are doing, right? It's not about, can they access this data? Like, it's more about, okay, I'm trying to do a specific task, and this task has resulted in this other subtask. Now, can this user do that subtask and that, whatever data is needed for that subtask? An example that I like to use, which is not quite from the agent world, but it maps very well to the agent world, is let's say I want to give my son my car keys to go fetch, some thing that I want from the nearby store, right? And my son takes the car and he finds out that the gas is low, and he says, "Okay, I'm going to use that credit card that my dad gave me to fill gas into the car," right? So, is that a legitimate use case? Is that a legitimate result of the intent that I had expressed when I said, "Hey, fetch this item from the nearby store"? And did you have something to say about that, Sean? Okay, when did you say it? Oh, I can you unmute? Pramod, can you unmute Sean?
We're good.
Okay.
Yeah, you hit Atul. That's a great example. I've heard that from you multiple times, which is a great example. And it's more around not only what can it do, what shouldn't it be able to do. So thank you for addressing that. I can't thank you enough for that.
Yeah, and of course, like, and you can see that we're just starting down this path, right? So it's not like any of us have the answers, but at least we know what the problem is, right now. And I think it's very important for us to, or let me restate that. We know at least some parts of the problem right now. So it's very important to discuss those. And for those who don't know, we recently started an AI identity management community group in the OpenID Foundation. I would highly recommend for you to participate in that, to discuss these things in a sort of a safe space where you don't have to worry about the IP implications of what you say and all those things. All right, I'm going to take the question from July, and then there's some comments in the chat. I'll look at those. July? Pramod, can you unmute July? Okay. July,
Oh, cool.
you're unmuted.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Atul. I think one of the my question is more about the LLM in plus RAG, because RAG, I guess this is not specific problem just appear after AI appears. It's sort of a problem in the federated search. So for RAG system, like people will have to pull the data out of API, build index in the database, and then feed that into LLM. So typically, the companies, in my understanding, they will just deploy policies on their APIs. Now that other products like Lean, they help customers build vector database, build the index, and then feed that into the LLM. So it actually breaks the zero trust model that we actually protected on the API side. I just thought about this, and then not entirely sure if we have a better solution on this. I want to hear your opinion.
Yeah. So I think what you're talking about, the training of the LLM using the data, that's kind of the pre-agent world, right? Because I think what's happening now is the context windows are getting so big that you don't actually need to put the data into the LLM anymore. You can just put it into the context and use it in the context, right? So it gets used for the period of that conversation and then it goes away, right? So it's a little safer than what we used to do before, which is sort of take that data and put it into the LLM using vector databases and all that. And then you'd be in a bigger problem, because now exfiltration becomes really easy, right? Because you can trick the LLM into revealing stuff that it's not supposed to, right? Because that data is actually sitting in that LLM in some form, right? But with the RAG approach, where you're really just augmenting the context and not actually training the LLM on that data, you now are limiting the scope of what can be exfiltrated to that current conversation, right? And that, I think, is a little better than what we had before. Does that make sense? All right, I'm going to take a few questions from the chat. Okay, so I think the question from Sahil, how do you implement context-aware authorization to constrain AI agents' action at runtime rather than retroactively? I'm going to get to that in the next few slides, so I'll just keep that, pending for now. But let's bring this question up again after I've talked about those slides, and then we can go from there. All right. Sean, do you still have the follow-up, or is that an old chat? I'm guessing that's an old chat. For Krishna, Sean has already answered your question. You can go to the OpenID website and you'll be able to find the community group and how to join it and all those details. So yeah. All right, Pramod. Jilai, did you still have a question, or is that an old hand? Pramod, can you unmute Jilai, please?
Oh, thank you. I have a follow-up question regarding
Sure.
your answer before. So, but then, so then for companies that help customers deploy like a RAG system, and then you are saying, essentially they retrieve the data out of the API and then probably deploy some additional cloud, and then they can apparently set up additional policy on those vector database before actually feeding to LLM. What do you think about identity can help us from this perspective? Because I think to customer, they are deploying some zero trust policies on their APIs, and then they will also, it's sort of an extra work for them to deploy additional zero trust policies on the vector database itself. And I felt this whole story get a little bit the responsibility is not clear now for the zero trust policies. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I understand. And I think you are going to have to do a little more work to secure AI. What I think my main sort of the insight that I can provide from based on whatever I've seen is that I think if you fundamentally change the model to be a zero standing privilege model, right? So what that means is that you don't have a lot of access by default, right? And then your access is actually decided contextually, right? So it depends upon what you're trying to do right now, right? And there's enough information in your enterprise that will tell you what this user is trying to do right now and what do they need access to right now, right? And so we'll get into some examples at the end, but I think that once you change that model to be one of zero standing privilege, then you will see that the work required to secure AI to the same level. I mean, AI has its own other issues, which we are not addressing here, but at least from a data access point of view, we are a little more covered. Just on that point about vector databases, I think as long as you're not using that data to train the model itself, then you're okay to use that data contextually, right? The problem is that if you're using the data to train the model, then you don't know under what context it's going to get used, right? And then that's going to be a huge problem. Cool. Awesome. So yeah, let me talk a little bit about zero standing privilege and sort of get to the question from Sahil. So I think this is how you might be able to address the the contextuality of the access. Is that your idea is that hey, I'm not going to give access to people based on what they could be doing at any given point of time, right? I'm going to give access to people only based on what they are doing right now, right? And that is the context of the access. So for example, let's say I ask a question, hey, I need, and this is an example that cracks people up is, hey, I'm a customer service agent at a very large, consumer facing company. And I asked the question to the AI, hey, give me Taylor Swift's home address, right? Because, I would like to go stalk her at her home, right? Obviously something that is horrific and you don't want to be doing, but um, what you, as a customer service agent, if you have blanket permissions, then let's say Taylor Swift is a customer, you're going to be able to find that data, right? Whether you're using AI or not. With zero standing privileges, what's going to happen is, oh, well, this user is not working on any case that relates to that customer. So why should they need that customer's home address? And so that access is denied. Obviously, companies will do a lot of protections around VIP customers and all that. So it's not a great example in that respect. But in general, if I were to try and access any data, if there is a contextual reason why that access is justified, then I think we are reducing the blast surface. And this works not just for AI, it also works in general, right? But it works more for AI because the kind of judgment that a user will apply. So for example, if I'm supposed to write an email to a third party about a customer's problem, as a business user, as a responsible user, a responsible employee, I'm not going to put unnecessary details into that email, right? But if I'm an AI agent and I'm writing that email, then I don't have that same level of judgment. I might just include details that are not pertinent to the problem and reveal a lot of data that the third party doesn't have any need or any right to have, right? And so I think having that zero standing privilege, which is more contextual, is actually very important in the AI case. And I don't know, Sahil, if I addressed your question. I think the question you're asking is how do you implement that, right? And so let's get to that when we look at the example implementation of ZSP, which is Signal. Pramod, did you want to add anything here?
No, I think I echo this is, I think this should have been done for humans also, but for agents, I think that is a lot more important is you just cannot have anything standing and everything has to be like just in time, like you just give it and then you take it back.
Yeah.
Perfect. Atul, feel free to talk about this. Yeah.
Yeah, and something we haven't quite addressed here, which Pramod mentioned in one of the slides before, which is the consent and the intent capture and those kinds of things, right? I think what's happening right now is with MCP, you have, and just to give you a quick rundown of what MCP is, I don't quite have a slide here, but for those who don't know, MCP is actually a very simple protocol, right? So what it does is it defines a MCP client and an MCP server. The MCP server has a set of tools, a set of resources, and a set of prompts. You can forget about the resources and prompts because most people don't use it, but the most important thing is the tools. And the tools are something that can be naturally called by an LLM or an agent of the LLM. And the tools respond in a way that is understood by the MCP client, which then relays that information to the LLM. Right. So what you first do is you list the tools that are accessible to you, and then you invoke the right tools, right? And all this is, the LLMs are capable through their sort of step-by-step reasoning, problem-solving skills. They're actually able to discover the tools. They're able to then say, oh, this tool is something that I could use to solve this problem, and then invoke that tool, right? So this is the autonomy and sort of the agentic behavior that Pramod talked about at the beginning. And so, just in that context, what's happening sometimes is that you either say, hey, each tool has its own scope, right? So remember how when you accept an OAuth consent dialog, like let's say, the Uber app is trying to access the profile photo that you have on Facebook or something like that. And you have to give the permission yeah, Uber can access the picture, my profile picture, right? And you click OK. So you're giving consent for that particular scope, right? Which is your profile picture. Now in the AI, MCP world, this gets hugely more complicated, right? Because every tool is a different scope in that respect, right? And then the further complication is if you're an employee and not an ordinary consumer, then your enterprise policies also have to come into play to give that consent, right? Is this user allowed to have this kind of permission, right? And so all of these things have to be managed at the time when the tool is to be accessed by the client. Now, OAuth as a technology is obviously much better than not having anything, which was the case a few years ago or a few months ago even. OAuth as a technology which is adopted by MCP now has the issue that you have a choice of either having scopes which are extremely fine grained, or you have a choice of having scopes that are very broad, which gives excessive authority, right? And if you're running the MCP server as the user, you're essentially now having either blanket permissions or you're actually having to consent for every little thing that the agent is doing, right? So there's a big trade-off here. Sean, I saw you raised your hand. Do you want to say something? Pramod, can you please unmute Sean?
Thanks, Atul. There's some emerging standards and specs around this, and I think there's a nice segue into this. OAuth is prevalent for TTLs being foregone and forelived. What would you do about reducing the scope to be more ephemeral? I've been reading something closely, and I think you were a co-author of this, transaction tokens. Does that play into here?
Yeah, I think great that you brought it up, right? So you remember that problem of LLM attestation, of agent attestation, capturing of intent, and all that. The overriding sort of thing here is that it is ephemeral, right? My intent right now is going to be different from my intent 2 minutes later, right? Because I'm doing a different task, and so you need to be able to capture that in some way. I think transaction tokens is a great way to do that. It's a spec that we wrote in that we're still working on in the IETF, and we had no idea about AI when we wrote this. We just did it as a way to secure identity and context in microservices call chains. But I think it applies quite well to this. I think what we might have to do is we may not be able to use the transaction token spec as it is, but we might be able to use the basic constructs and construct some different spec that has the ability for LLMs to issue these attested tokens that can pass through the whole chain from LLM to agent to MCP servers, where every step is attested, and there's capture. You can capture the intent and things like that. Long way to go. I'm even afraid to propose it because there are so many proposals right now in this authentication authorization space as far as AI is concerned. I think there's a lot of noise, and I fear that if I propose one more thing right now, it's just going to get lost in the noise. So, but yeah, I do think that transaction tokens is not a bad idea in this world. So thanks for bringing that up. But yeah, so I think coming back to this ZSP, and why transaction tokens helps ZSP is because it's ephemeral, right? A transaction token is short-lived. It's typically a few seconds to maybe a few minutes, like no more than 5 minutes. Typically, what it takes to execute a call chain, right? And so what I feel is that if you can give these permissions in a way that is very short-lived, very contextual, then you can let the agents access the data because you're going to be able to control what they can access for that specific task based on the parameters of what the user is doing. I think you will be able to secure it much better. And one other thing which I should mention is that you can also limit what tools are discoverable by the user based on what they're working on right now. So let's say, coming back to that customer service example, if I'm not working on any customer's case, then maybe I shouldn't have access to the tool that says get customer details or something like that, right? So the tool discovery itself can be limited based on what the user is doing. Sean, maybe we should keep Sean unmuted. Pramod, yeah.
No, hey, Atul, I think it's good. Something I've seen in talking to other companies, to remain nameless, locking down your agents is pivotal, because if you have users that unnecessarily ask things incorrectly, your cost goes through the roof. Another great example.
That is a great point. That is a great point, because yeah, I heard that just saying please and thank you increases the costs like enormously, right? So yeah, I don't know what to do about that. So one of the things I feel in this attestation business is that you can actually reconcile the work that has been initiated by the LLM, and you can actually have a way to bill between the MCP server and the LLM, right? Because now that the LLM has generated work for you, and you can reconcile it somehow with the LLM later, because there's a transaction token that tells you like immutable proof that it was generated by the LLM, right? And so, yeah, I think, yeah, I think that's an interesting consequence of this using transaction tokens. Hey, maybe I should propose it after all, right? Because it seems to be addressing quite a few problems. So, thanks for that. So yeah, coming back to this, I think I just have a couple of more slides. I don't know how we are doing on time. Okay, we need to hurry up. So just as an example, and this is kind of a little commercial thing, but it's an example of how ZSP works. So what we do in Signal is we build what is known as the identity data fabric, right? So what that is we continuously ingest data from systems of record. So these could be your ticketing system, your PagerDuty, your Salesforce, your directory, Workday, whatever it is that you have in terms of how you run your business, right? So typically, when you get an access request, for example, you may be making an manual decision saying, oh, this user needs access to this because they are doing these things, right? Signal basically tries to automate that by continuously ingesting all that data into the identity data fabric. And the consequence of this is that at the time you're making the decision, Signal doesn't actually have to rely on any other system because it already has the data asynchronously with it. So it builds the context. And you can use standard protocols like CAPE to build that data fabric. But we understand that most people don't have CAPE today. And so we have implemented proprietary integrations to ingest that data, right? And then you can have a policy engine, and I'll get into some example policies, and a CAPE hub, which sort of can do asynchronous outbound actions, which you can go and revoke permissions when some things are done or the context is changed and things like that, right? So you don't actually leave any long-standing permissions, and that's how you get zero standing privileges. Now, what we've done with that is we've built an MCP gateway that encapsulates all that. So what the LLM sees when they're using an MCP client is they see only one MCP server, which is the Signal MCP gateway. And then it is kind of front-ending all the MCP servers that you might be interested in using, right? And so based on what you're working on right now, the LLM will only know a few things like, hey, this user is not in the HR department, and so they're not going to be able to see the Workday server, right? Or this user is currently working on this particular customer's case. So when they call, let's say ServiceNow, they'll be able to discover the tool that says get customer details. Now when they call get customer details, they'll only get the detail of that one customer that the user is working on, right? So basically you're able to limit a lot of the exposure of that data to the MCP gateway. And now as long as your client is not taking that data and then sticking it into the training of the LLM, you are able to just use it in that context and get rid of it once that task is done. So there's a good way to like limit the exposure. There are still possibilities like prompt injection. There are still possibilities like unintended data exposure just based on what the user has access to. but now you've reduced the exposure quite a bit. So we can go into the next slide, Pramod, just to see the sort of some examples. So on the left, you can see a policy that about tool discovery. That hey, if I'm an account executive, as it is recorded in Workday, I can call the MCP tool for getting customer records if I'm on a compliant device. So just a simple policy that limits who can call that tool. Now, if I'm let's say not on a compliant device, then I won't be able to get access, and so there's less chance of that data getting exfiltrated. Now, on the right-hand side, you see when an actual tool gets invoked, let's say I'm a DevOps user and I'm trying to invoke a tool that affects the production AWS account, I can do that only if I have an active ticket assigned that relates to that account. And you have a signal from CrowdStrike that says, well, this user's risk is low. So these are the ways in which you can actually build policies that that limit the exposure of data exfiltration or any other unintended data modification and things like that using AI. So that's all I had. Pramod, over to you. July has raised his hand, so can we ask July the question? Let July ask the question.
Yeah, thanks, Atul. One question I have about just on this slide is you in the previous slide you are letting the MCP client make the request, and then you have a MCP gateway there. But are you assuming that the MCP client actually passing the end user's context to your gateway? Because potentially the Claude or Gemini they may just pass their machines context to you rather than the end user context.
Yeah, great question. So Pramod, can you go to the previous slide? Thank you. So yeah, you're right that we are assuming that the call from the MCP gateway is somehow telling us who the user is, right? The best way to do that is the MCP protocol actually supports OAuth. And using OAuth, you'll be able to get the identity of the user. Not always the case. In most cases, you will be able to do that. And based on that, you will know who the user is. The parameters of the call will tell you what the user is trying to do. And the MCP gateway can look at the user and the parameters to determine, okay, whether this call should be allowed or not. And, if the call is about listing the tools, what tools should be exposed and things like that. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, but I guess in most cases that probably will work. In some corner cases, I mean, for example, if
so I think you have a good point. Let's say I have a let's say I have a MCP server which is on the far right here, which needs to run in like privileged mode, right? Like it needs to have permissions. That can be handled by the MCP gateway. The arrow on the left, the arrow number 1, will always be in the user context. So you don't have to worry about, because you can do the OAuth, and we'll support the OAuth on our MCP server. And so you'll always do that in the user context. And then Signal can use the privileged credential to access the target MCP server.
One use case I've seen is these MCP clients, AI agents starts to allow users to schedule some tasks, running in a later time or something. For example, I want, these days AI agents, most of them give you a sort of response immediately. But longer, like with deep thinking or these kind of things, they may run this task for like an hour or 2 hours. So in that case, the user may just leave the user agent. How can we sort of preserve the user context in the long term, and without storing the end user credential, which is a risky thing? What do you think on this one?
Yeah, so there are, I think, 2 cases there. The one that you mentioned, and then there is another one. So in the first case, what you're getting on the left-hand side from the OAuth server is a long-lived token, right? And so even if that task lasts for like one day or something, you'll get that token. So we're not yet talking about transaction tokens. That's a different problem, right? This is just in the current state of things. You're getting an OAuth token that'll have a lifetime, which could be about a day or couple of days or whatever it is, right? Depending upon the policy on your OAuth server, right? The second use case, which you kind of touched upon, is that you may have agents that run autonomously, right? So they're not running in the user context. They're basically running as, hey, I'm writing this agent that'll, as soon as something comes into Salesforce, I'm going to kick off a workflow and I'm just going to start doing stuff, right? There's no user in that case, right? So in that case, what you have to do is assume a machine identity that is appropriately permissioned like a user identity, right? And so it is similar to a user case, but the principal is not a user, it's a machine, right? So yeah, you can solve both those cases that way. And just to be clear, right? So it's not like this product has been around for 10 years and we know everything. We're going to do a lot of discovery as we go, but this is a good starting point, I think. Thank you. All right, I think we are a little over time. So Pramod.
Yeah, so thanks a lot for coming. If there's no questions, we can just wrap it up. Special thanks for Atul for being my co-host here and being the subject matter expert. If you like this, let us know. We would happy to do some more sessions on this topic.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Sorry I wasn't able to get to all the questions, but yeah, loved having you here, and let's do more of these in the future.
Thanks a lot. Have a nice weekend. Bye.
Have a nice weekend.